It's been what, 4 months? Show money is finally back. We were gonna try to go to a monthly schedule. We ended up having a 4 month break, but we really will try to go to a monthly schedule. I got a little bit busy. It was probably mostly my fault. Um, I'm Paul Gift, the economist. We're back again with Jason Cruz, our lawyer, and John Nash, the man who knows everyone and everything in mixed martial arts. We've got a few things to talk about today, pretty much catching up on a lot of the business activity that's been going on in MMA. And of course, we have to start with Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather, the fight that we all, I think, thought was not going to happen. And maybe our probability of it happening has changed since then. And we're going to start with John. How have your thoughts changed on the fight with recent events, John?
Well, first I want to say I wasn't 100% against saying it would never happen. I think I was the most optimistic, but my odds were still very low. The changing wise, it's a lot has changed in this fight. I think the odds have increased dramatically, partly because of the UFC's involvement. They seem open to the fight now, but ironically, the UFC being open to the fight might be the reason why Conor McGregor might not be as enthusiastic to fight. We'll get into that later, but there's a whole thing about how do you split the money, the revenue, and Conor McGregor obviously is doing this fight solely as a money grab. He's looking for a lot of money. So that's one aspect we're going to have to go and do. But right now I'm thinking that it's the odds are better than they have ever been that the fight will happen. All three major factors, major players, Mayweather really wants it to happen. Conor pretty much wants it to happen, but on his terms. UFC seems willing to happen as long as they get some input on what the terms are. So there's seems to be a much better chance. Everything seems to be moving towards the direction of having the fight, but there's still a little bit of nuances and a little bit of debate going on behind the scenes how it'll take place. I think that's my read. Jason, I'm going to ask you on this front is, do you see it happening that way? Do you think does it seem like it's more likely to happen, or do you think it's just UFC kind of saying they're going along with it just as purely as, for the optics of not looking like they're in someone's way, but they're behind the scenes still going to do whatever they can to block it?
I think that it's the latter. I'm perhaps maybe of the three of us, I'm the least up to actually happen. I think that you have a lot of smoke but no fire. I just feel that it's a lot of people talking about it happening. You have McGregor, going to the Dan Rafael, the boxing writer, got a lot of press and ink by going off the other week about it happening. But in the end, I believe that you have two competing factors here. One, Floyd Mayweather is undoubtedly the guy that will say he's the A side. He got 60-40 or something, the advantageous cut of the Pacquiao fight. He will he's going to be boxing. If there's going to be an event, it's going to be him and McGregor boxing. You have so he will demand the most money, and then you against the fact that McGregor will be seeking as much a big split of this event if it's ever going to happen. And then you also have the UFC who will want their share of the purse as well, whatever that may be. So you've got a lot of competing stakeholders in this. And I see the fact that people are saying it's going to happen as a way to use scapegoats if it doesn't happen. That's how I see it. Paul, what do you think?
I thought that it was almost a joke in the beginning, and then as it seemed to get more serious, the big issue was the cut. Like you said, Mayweather's always going to want 60%, at least 40% for the UFC and McGregor to come to a deal with. But what makes me a little bit more optimistic as time goes by is essentially a few things. But McGregor, the thing I'll give him credit for is he does seem willing to just put himself out there and try things, and claiming that he wanted to go to welterweight, but he seems like the type of guy who wants to take on new challenges. And he was very humble when he got defeated, and he went back and he worked hard, and he redeemed himself in the rematch. But he seems like that type of guy. I don't think he'll be as harmed as other people do if he loses, or if and when he loses. And the thing that I think of is if Floyd Mayweather came into MMA and fought McGregor and just got worked, got demolished, would people still want to see him 3 months later or 6 months later fight Manny Pacquiao again? I know a lot of people say no, but that thing would probably do huge numbers. I don't think it would damage him that much. And then there was the issue of the earnouts, and we had the MMA Junkie article on the earnouts, where a lot of people thought that there was this deadline to earn, what is it, 175 million by June 30th of this year, or to get that payout if they can get their EBITDA up to what, 275 million. John's article yesterday, was it yesterday, John?
Yeah.
Yesterday did a great job of clearing that up. If you go to Bloody Elbow and look at John's article yesterday, he basically says, he shares the information that the earnouts are, what is it? Additional incentive, 175 million paid contingent upon achieving 275 million of LTM EBITDA. What that is that's trailing 12 months, but no earlier than June 30th of 2017. So that if at any point there's a trailing 12-month EBITDA of 275 million starting at June 30th or beyond, they get that payout. That's according to John's article. So I originally thought that they would want to jam Mayweather McGregor in June, and maybe they will, because then you capitalize on UFC 200, the 2 McGregor fights that were there. What is it, 196 and 202 and 205, and then the Rousey fight. If you can jam it all in before we hit July.
Yeah, there'd be 5 big events then that they'd have.
Right. But they don't have to. They still have some leeway. It doesn't seem like a hard deadline anymore. So did that adjust your thinking when you saw that, John?
It did a little bit. I mean, part of me wonders if Mayweather booked June, because he supposedly booked the arena already, and he booked June as kind of a message to the UFC. Let's get the deal done, because then we can add this. I'm sure someone in his camp is looking at the reports and stuff too and knows, hey, they have an interest to get this earnout. But for the UFC's point of view, and even maybe McGregor, is, I guess the question is, did they already make that amount? 4 big blockbuster pay-per-views. That's probably well over 100 million in EBITDA right there. So you got a question. They might have made the 275 million without even another big event. They might not, though. So I guess those earnouts is one reason I think that this fight is more likely, as well as all the what the UFC said to their lenders about how much they expect with their EBITDA. I mean, they still have expectations on that loan and the investors to meet. So all those point to me that UFC would be willing to do this fight. This is something the Fertittas would never have done. They've never would have agreed to this. It's just too risky. I mean, you said you don't think it would hurt McGregor. It might not, but at the same time, I mean, what if he goes out there and looks like Ronda did in her last fight? It just gets clowned. That could be damaging to the UFC long term. But short term, if you're looking to make a quick hit, this fight's going to be monstrous. And I got some stuff I got working on, but I'll tell you that I know people have done analysis of the fight, and people in the pay-per-view industry ahead of time, that there were people out. This fight has been in works for a while, partly with people that weren't in either camp, so there's no contract breaches. There were people that were working on it before, and who came with analysis that would offer like McGregor like 50 million to Floyd's $110 million payday guarantee, and that they would sell, their estimates were they would sell conservatively like 3 million pay-per-views. So people expect this to be a blockbuster event. And I think what the one thing that makes it maybe step back now is, if McGregor was talking about going it alone before, he got to keep all the B-side money. So there was plenty of money to make it worthwhile to get embarrassed. The question now that might make McGregor now want to do it is, if he has to split that B-side money with the UFC, not only is it no longer worth getting killed, the UFC also has an incentive to make sure he doesn't make so much that he doesn't want to fight in MMA anymore.
That's a good point.
And so my guess, and this is a guess, I have no information, my guess is if the UFC lets it go, the UFC is not going to let him get paid a huge amount of money, but they'll renegotiate his MMA contract to get him more pay on that, to guarantee that he comes back to MMA. That's my guess. Just call me stupid, Jason. Tell me why I'm wrong.
No, that actually makes sense. I mean, from the financial perspective, it does make sense. I think you just have. I think the huge question is, how much does WME IMG want out of the cut of a fight that may or may not happen. I think from I mean, and that's probably the bigger issue is between McGregor and the UFC. You know, you got that. You also got the issue of, is he going to be signing a waiver to the UFC as far as like if something were to happen, if he actually were to get hurt, where he could not fight in MMA again, or that kind of thing. Is he what contract at that point? I'm sure for McGregor's side, he wants some assurances that that he'll come back to the UFC, or maybe he doesn't. Maybe he actually shocks the world, knocks out Mayweather. I mean, trilogy on your, or at least a rematch, a huge rematch on your hands, and McGregor will be wanting more and more money. So from that perspective, that would make financial sense. But then again, I mean, obviously the hurdle of making it happen is just, you look at the history and see that Mayweather Pacquiao took years and years to go. I mean, I don't, and it basically it all came together because they were at the same freaking basketball game. I don't think McGregor's a basketball fan, so that might not be happening. Anyway, I think the initial hurdle is getting everybody agreeing to the fight, and so that's going to be the biggest thing. And it's just a money pie split.
I like the way you tried to help him out with the promotion there, Jason. If McGregor wins, he might win. He's not going to win. Don't sell people false hopes so they buy the pay-per-view thinking that actually might happen.
Only on pay-per-view. Yeah, no, he's not going to win. I mean, yeah.
Okay. The Simpsons technique of a heart attack on the way to the ring. That's his best hope.
Yeah. You got to give someone a punch, maybe a puncher's chance, an injury chance. I know they have shoes on, but a John Jones toe chance, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Something?
I don't know. I just can't buy the best defensive boxer of our generation who's just eating up, who's just eating up guys like Manny Pacquiao and stuff, and that somehow a non-boxer's going to come in there and even with the puncher's chance. So that's, another thing to think about too is possible the UFC is there might be a way the UFC doesn't have to get the biggest B-side. I guess what if Mayweather negotiates not with Showtime or HBO, but goes to UFC and says, you guys produce the pay-per-view, so you get the pay-per-view cut that HBO and Showtime normally get, 10%, anywhere from 5 to 10% of the revenue. And plus, UFC is a media company now. They have ways to sell it over UFC.com. They get to collect more money. They could there's a bunch of different techniques UFC could make to make money, pieces here and there that would add up to millions for them. That might make it worthwhile to make them the official platform or the official distributor of the Mac Mayweather fight. So that's always a possibility too. There's a little, if the UFC's involved because they do all this stuff, there's a little bit more money to splice up because they can cut other people out if they want to.
Their sponsors would love it. Imagine that, right? Yeah. How much did the beer companies pay for Mayweather Pacquiao?
But I think they'd redo all the sponsors because it would not be a UFC event.
We'll see. Yeah,
they'd make everybody rebid to do it over again. TV contracts too overseas. It would not be going to UFC, contracted overseas events. It's not part of the package. This is brand new.
Yeah.
So pay again. So that's another way to do it too.
UFC Boxing LLC.
But it is interesting too. It brings up the thing when you think about this is you got Mayweather McGregor being talked about, which seems absolutely absurd. But it doesn't seem that absurd in the way the UFC has been running, basically leading up to the sale and since the sale. There's been a lot of changes in the direction William Morris has been taking the UFC. I mean, Jason, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but have you ever seen this amount of top-ranked fighters leaving the UFC for another promotion? Have you ever seen the UFC issue this many interim belts or book fights that seem a little more – they've always booked fights, I guess, that are questionable for title shots, but they seem to be doing it more and more than they ever had in the past.
I mean, GSP Bisping. I mean, obviously, something that if you're a guy like Damian Maia, I mean, you have to be throwing up your hands and saying, "What is this a sport or is this entertainment?" Obviously, the letting go of some of the fighters does make a little bit of sense from the perspective of who they are. And then you look at the fights, and you do wonder why we have rankings anymore, because we're not putting fights on pursuant to the rankings. We're kind of putting in fights just because they look more attractive than the people that have worked their way up to the top, perhaps, like a Damian Maia. So, yeah, I do definitely see that there is more of a geared toward an entertainment value versus pure sport. So, how about you? How about yourself, Paul?
Yeah, I always think of Jacare on this because I wanted him to get a title shot forever. It makes you wonder: are sort of new people calling the shots? Is the UFC learning different things, or have they developed different priorities when they've seen what happened with Ronda and Conor McGregor? And it just, we don't know what happened in the negotiations with those fighters, right? That's the one thing that we don't know, how much money they were demanding and whatnot, or asking for. But it feels to me like the UFC, I want to know what Mick Maynard is doing right now. He seems to be the guy that is the key to this. Meaning, are you focusing on the bottom and star hunting? Because it seems like, look, they're getting feedback. Is Lorenz Larkin going to make us or break us down the line? No. Who was it? Tumenov, and what were the other guys? What was the other guy? I don't remember his name.
Krylov.
Yeah. Are they going to make us break us down the line? Even if they're good and could be champions, are people going to want to say, are they going to say, I've got to stay home and watch this guy on a Saturday night? Or are they saying, look, if we think you want too much money, we can let you go even if you're in top 10, because what makes us our money is the next Ronda Rousey, the next Conor McGregor, the next so-and-so like that, or Brock Lesnar, if there is another one like that. Are they focusing their efforts on that and saying, hey, it doesn't even matter if you're good. If people don't really want to pay to see you and you're asking for more money than we want to give you, we can let you go. It's no big deal to us. That's what I think of when I see that sort of stuff happening.
Yeah,
John, what about you?
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I think part of it is they look at the bottom line and they think, okay, these top guys are draws, and the guys that are expensive. This is actually almost a rebuttal of the whole Joe Silva method. Joe Silva was the idea that the best would fight the best, and you'd have all the top guys fighting, and you'd keep these guys fighting into the point where you could burn out and get a top guy after 2 or 3 losses. And if he's boring, then cut him. If you didn't like him, but you had to make sure he was defeated enough that you didn't cut John Fitch after 1 loss. You made sure he had 2 losses in the promotion before you cut him. But the whole idea is keep him going up. Now that without even on losses, top 10 guys expect to get paid because they're top guys in the sport. But they're top guys in the sport that aren't big draws. So they're not, the UFC is probably weighing they're not that valuable. In a weird way, our buddy Rob Macy must be loving this, because this is almost like he could take this and say, hey, looking for when he's, him and his guys are out lobbying for the Ali Act, when the next time, John Fitch and Randy Couture show up in DC, it's like, oh, look at this. Guys that are even good don't get title shots. It doesn't matter. They have no control over their careers. And they're going to point this stuff. To me, I was kind of floored that William Morris is doing some of the stuff, the title stuff, because it's like you're just giving them you're giving them campaign material to spread to congressmen. What's wrong with the sport? So that I'm floored about. And the other thing too is that I think it does show, for the UFC's point of view, as long as if you're not a top guy in the sport, if you're not holding a belt or something, and if you have a loss and you're ranked down, people don't really care. It's all about getting the title.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they're weighing. They're like, well, no one's going to care that we cut this guy because he doesn't have a UFC title. What they're going to care about is the next guy that wins the title. It doesn't matter if he's not as good as the guy we cut. They only care that this guy holds the UFC title.
Right.
And that's what they're looking at. That's they're making a purely economic choice on, how to, not purely, there's still some sporting element with the UFC, but just not like they had before.
But even for someone like Ryan Bader, I would just think that they'd say, hey, if this guy happened to win our title, we'd have to pay him a lot more. We'd probably have to pay him a lot more. And nobody's going to buy the Ryan Bader title shot papers.
We're not getting an increase in pay-per-view buys thanks to Ryan Bader. We want, which again, the guys that are pushed for the Ali Act got to be loving that. It's like, listen, they're denying guys a chance to be the champion based on how charismatic they are.
Right.
That's the weird thing about that. But it's Yeah, it's just it's a strange direction. William Morris is not strange. Actually, I'm not surprised. You almost thought they'd have to go this way as soon as they spent that kind of money on the promotion, and we're looking to, you know, you're going to cut costs. But it's weird is that on that lenders deck that they sent out, they mentioned no cost savings from fighters. There was nothing in there about saving costs from fighters. So it makes me wonder: are they not making big enough cuts in the other categories, or they're not seeing big enough returns that they wanted to on the normal avenues, that they decided that, hey, maybe we need to also save money on fighters instead of all the other places we're going to cut costs. We're also going to save money on cutting costs on fighters, because they're not sending videos out to fighters anymore. How much does that cost them? I can't imagine that's killing them. But
I think that, you know, it's just another example of trimming off the fat is to say, just, you know, we could get rid of some of these guys that aren't productive or making any sense, and then we could do other things for other fighters that we see in our future, like maybe a Cody Garbrandt or someone, you know, I mean, what just came to mind is like they made the women's featherweight division for Cyborg, you know, things of that nature that would, you know, make lucrative sense for them.
Yeah, and I wouldn't put it past them to have thought that way in July, and then they get in there and they're running it for what, 8 months, 9 months, and all of a sudden, you know, they think differently. I wouldn't put that past them at all. And the reason I mentioned Mick Maynard was I've heard that Sean Shelby is handling sort of the incumbent fighters. I was asking if Sean Shelby took the higher weight fighters and Maynard has the lower weights, or how it's going. I've heard that Sean Shelby's handling the incumbent fighters and Maynard is sort of handling the newcomers. That's why I sort of made that comment about Mick Maynard, that is he out scouting and trying to find the next huge superstar kind of thing, really focusing on that as opposed to saying, do we really need to keep Lawrence Larkin, even though I love Lawrence Larkin. But yeah, so what do you guys think about the new titles? What, I mean, I'm sure we all had strong opinions on what was it, Bisping Henderson, whether they be good or bad. But man, people went crazy at Bisping GSP. What were you thinking, and how do you think it ties into the WME strategy? Jason, let's start with you.
You know, it makes respect. It's good because you got a guy it's good for Bisping and GSP, because one, you got a guy in Bisping who, if he showed up on time, would be a great seller of the fight, whereas GSP is more the fighter, the fighter, in-ring fighter, and not the guy on the mic. Although he did better than he did when the memorable Nick Diaz Wolf Tickets press conference, which was great, by the way. But I think that Bisping GSP is an interesting fight. It's also interesting the fact that they announced it but didn't announce a date, which makes me believe that it's kind of contingent on when GSP is ready. I mean, it's noticeable because it's going to be at 185. So GSP doesn't have to. He could warm up to training. He doesn't have to cut so much weight. And then also the fact that Dana wanted it in July for International Fight Week, which would have been great. But you hear in an interview that GSP wants it sometime in the fall just because he's not ready. And therein lies the reason why the awkwardness that a fight was announced but no date was set. So.
Wasn't also part of it that USADA made a change to their policy on when you can come back, how long you have to be out?
No, there's no more Lesnar waivers.
Yeah, that's. I mean, wasn't it they say wasn't there mention that they're going to change it to 6 months or something for fighters that left and they're coming back to the UFC, that retired and then come back?
I thought for GSP it would still be 4.
Yeah, but I just wondered from the optics of that, and considering we'll talk about later, hopefully, that lawsuit, that they might have, you know, there might be a little bit behind the scenes. Can we put the fight on that soon? Should we wait to put the fight on until after, you know, make sure we stick to the 6 months?
Yeah, I think that's true as well. You know, especially since GSP had been a guy lobbying for.
Uh-oh.
Maybe he's hardwired in Wi-Fi too.
Oh, Jason's back. Yeah, I just think, and you know, to get on my little rant here, but I've always, this is a suggestion I had for the UFC, and I'll give it again. And I think what they should do, and kind of what they should do to maybe defeat the Ali Act if they want, is just put kind of stringent guidelines on who gets to when do you have to defend the belt and against who. It doesn't have to be concrete. You could always just say every 15 months you have to fight our declared #1, contender.
Yeah.
And then in between you can do your Dan Henderson versus Bisping. Then he has to face Jacare or Romero, and then after that you can do GSP. But you just do it. It would also, I think, it would alleviate a lot of disgruntledness by a lot of fighters who are very. You can just detect the frustration of a lot of the top fighters because they have no clue what they have to do to get a title shot, and they just feel like they're being strung out. Like Damian Maya must feel that they have him fight Masvidal now, who declares that he's the guy that they bring in to defeat guys UFC don't like. I mean, how you got to be sitting there and go, that might be true. Maybe that's his purpose. Is he's serving as a John Pesek policeman? That's an old pro wrestling guy that back when they would actually beat the crap out of guys that wanted to make sure to get him out of the title picture. He's serving that purpose. He's serving as a barrier. And I think if they just had some strong guidelines like that were, it's not going to. You still have the option of making the fights you want, but it would let fighters know, okay, this is kind of what I have to do to get my title shot. That there's no way that they can, that I can be put on the back burner again and again and again. I think it would help a lot. And a lot of fans, I think it would alleviate a lot of, I guess the most casual fans don't give a crap, but who buy the pay-per-views. But for hardcore fans, I think it would alleviate a lot of, frustration they have about, is it a real sport or not?
It would. And you could even have like a sort of best interest of the sport exception in there for like the times when you've kicked the crap out of someone twice, but they still happen to be the #1 contender and nobody wants to see the third bout.
Yeah. But the rules could be that if you faced each other, you can get bumped, or you could have a rule that if a guy's moving up a weight class and he holds the belt from the weight class below, that you can make an exception. Something like that. You go like, oh yeah, that's a legitimate. That's within our guidelines. But you could write them out, and so people would, so no one would be upset like, oh, I can't believe you're, that whatever fight. I'm trying to think of one guy that you're not letting. Now I'm drawing a blank at who got beat twice badly by someone. Misha Tate against Ronda Rousey.
Oh, right.
That's a good example. You're like, well, you've gotten beat badly by her twice. The rule says after 2 losses, we can delay for 2 more fights or whatever.
Right. Or even Demetrius Johnson and Benavidez. The first one wasn't bad, but really the second one was kind of bad, and nobody wanted to see the third one, right?
And Dodson too. I mean, if you bring Dodson back, he goes, well, you lost twice already. We don't need to see it again. Yeah. We can make those rules. I think that would help a lot. But I got to, I think, and Bellator's got to be really happy with all this, because no longer do we have to have, Royce Gracie versus Ken Shamrock.
Right.
They're actually getting a pretty good stable. They're getting a better stable of older stars with, Chael Sonnen and they got Rampage. They got and Vanderlei Silva, who, they're old, but they're a better stable of old stars than what they had before. And they're also getting a lot of pretty good, talented guys. I mean, Rory McDonald before, but now we got Lawrence Larkin just signed with them. Brian Bader. You're talking about top 10 talent, which the UFC never used to let go. So, I mean, and now they announced they're going to do a pay-per-view. So, Paul, looking at what Bellator is doing, I mean, do you like the direction they're going? Do you see hope for them, or do you think this is just, just a slight bump that they're going to from this, and then after a while it'll go back to the natural balance of, freak fights?
I don't know. I'm always skeptical of one league going against another league with the network effects of it and all, but Bellator absolutely has to be loving this. Even without the pay-per-views, just you're getting yourself some legit name fighters that on free TV, I think a decent amount of people would want to see. And I don't know. Tell me if this went through your head. It went through my head. I'm not sure what I think of it, but I did think of the fact that when the UFC is letting all these guys go, is there the possibility? You guys, I'm sure, saw my interview with the former commissioner of the FTC, and the way that he was sort of talking about how they analyzed the UFC, or you could infer how they analyzed the UFC. Is there even the possibility that they're thinking, hey, once this antitrust lawsuit is over, in a few years, when it's all said and done, if we don't like the way Bellator is heading, maybe we could just make them a killer offer and buy up those fighters again? And we know that it doesn't seem like the FTC will give us any trouble. That went through my head. I'm not sure what I think about it, but I don't think it's something to completely dismiss. I don't know. What about you guys?
Well, you guys
Does it harm consumers? That would be the question.
This is the theory. I think we've had this theory before too. Is it kind of hand in hand with that? Is for UFC's point of view, the old provisions they would use in their contract to keep fighters from leaving, they haven't been using them at all. I've heard of no fighter being frozen out. I've heard of no fighter having his contract extended with the tolling provision. I've heard of they haven't used the matching clause at all since Gilbert Melendez before the lawsuit was filed.
Right.
It's very possible they're just like, well, just to be safe, let's not use any of the stuff in the lawsuit. You know, we're going to lose fighters, but if we win the lawsuit, who cares? We can start using it again because, you know, we won. and if we lose, we've limited the damages that we could possibly be put on us.
Right, and it really would probably, and it shouldn't have a serious effect on a lawsuit, but it is like the optics of it, possibly something like that. You know, it's something to consider. But so what, Jason? What are your thoughts on Bellator and what they're doing?
Aren't we going to get Matt Hughes, one more time? I thought Matt Hughes was coming back. Was it wrong there?
And you should only come back with fans should choose the fighter that they want to see kick the crap out of Matt Hughes. There should be a poll one night. Let every Bellator watcher vote in and just pick the dude that they want to see kick the crap out of Matt Hughes.
Oh my goodness. I do think that Bellator, with what it's planning for June is going to be huge. I think they are trying to find their sweet spot as far as getting yourself some freak fights, which I consider Son and Silva, but then you get some legitimate MMA fighting with Michael Chandler defending his title on the pay-per-view. You'll probably get, Lorenz Larkin is fighting Douglas Lima. And then you'll have Britt Bader, and then you'll have known names. I think that the good thing about Bellator signing these guys is that you'll definitely have, for the casual viewer, a name that'll pop up. I mean, every now and then you'll get a Bellator telecast on Spike on Friday night, and you'll turn to it, and I'm like, who are these guys? You know? But now I think that there'll be enough signings where you'll get a guy that, hey, Lorenz Larkin, I'll tune into, because I remember him from UFC. Ryan Bader, I remember him. Benson Henderson, same thing. So I think from that perspective, Bellator is turning the direction. Now, whether or not pay-per-view is right for them, that might be another question.
That's going to be the interesting thing. See, yeah, John, go ahead.
I think the one thing is, if you're in the fight business, you eventually have to get on pay-per-view if you want to be a major fight promoter, because without pay-per-view, they can't make enough money to pay the big stars they need to get people watching Bellator. And that's kind of that's the catch-22. I mean, that's what always kills every other promotion. You have to start putting on pay-per-views, not a lot, just enough to be able to afford so that the biggest name guys can now decide to sign with you instead of the UFC, because they're going to make the kind of money they would have made in the UFC, or at least you can offer more. UFC keeps such a large profit margin. Bellator would be very successful if they didn't make a dime on pay-per-view, but as long as it allowed them to afford top-notch fighters, they can say that these guys are now in Bellator, so people start to be watching the other product. It'd be worthwhile for them, and I think that's why they have to get on pay-per-view. They have to be successful.
So I think that the main drive, even though this is co-main event, I think the main driver of this pay-per-view has got to be Fedor. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you guys think Fedor is not going to be around forever? Do you guys think that they'll be able to sort of sustain a pay-per-view the way things are going with when Fedor is gone? What do you think, John?
Not with the current. No, they're going to need to either build someone internally, that's a big name, or entice someone to leave the UFC. Maybe they'll luck out and have a big type fight that, such a rivalry where two guys that are kind of known, like getting a public brawl and everybody watches it, and you can build some around that. But my guess is when Fedor leaves, and they'll have to entice someone to leave the UFC that they can build a pay-per-view around. And the odds too is that fighter that leaves the UFC, they'll probably have to have another fighter available because it's more the fight than that fighter that's going to sell the next pay-per-view. That's why if they sign Joe Duffy, if I was Bellator, I'd side Joe Duffy just on the outside chance that somehow Conor McGregor fights out his contract. Now you have you go, hey Conor, we have a fight we could put on with you in Ireland that people in Ireland pay a lot of money to see.
You know, one of the interesting things in the Bellator aspect of the UFC lawsuit, right? How Bellator is fighting their subpoenas, is the UFC. When you looked at their wording, they really seem to think. I don't think they've seen Bellator documents yet, but they really seem to think that Bellator's financials and projections are going to show that they have this sort of planned out growth in the future, that they're really looking to expand. It seems like the UFC thinks that they're going to see that, and they're going to argue that they can't be restricting Bellator, but that's not why I'm bringing it up. It really seems like the UFC thinks that they're going to see Bellator documents showing this sort of rapid growth or planned growth, which
I've
seem
seen
to support
Bellator,
what you're saying.
I've seen Bellator documents from the Bjorn Rebnier when he first started that had just really high growth projections.
Yeah, but that's when you're starting. You always have
failed miserably at getting them. They didn't do any. They didn't meet any of those goals. But that's what they were looking to make a lot of money. They should have been rolling in it by now.
Everybody, when you're starting, has huge growth projections.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that Bellator would have those now, but it would seem to support this idea that they want to get into pay-per-view and grow it if the UFC is right, and what it seems like they're arguing.
Yeah, I mean, the other possibility is, I mean, there's ways to do it without pay-per-view. I mean, that's why I thought Showtime was in a stronger position, because being on a subscription channel, there's a better chance of making, without running pay-per-view, there's a better chance to make a lot of revenue per event, because, you know, you people are paying less, but if you get 600,000, 700,000 people that subscribe just for that, guess what? They're making 40 million a year just off your subscribers. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, maybe that could be a future Bellator plan too, is some sort of, you know, whatever the heck Viacom's up to in the future, they could be thinking some pay subscription channel in the future with them or two. But yeah, right now I think pay-per-view is key. I mean, it's just key just to get the top guys. I mean, without, you know, the name value. If you look what happened to Strikeforce when they got Fader, how big that changed their, you know, overnight their promotion was now a rival. It wasn't really a rival, but it was viewed as a much more legitimate competition for the UFC. And the only way they could do that is that their projection was eventually they'd get on pay-per-view, and, you know, that the money on pay-per-view would be used to pay them off. But so that's.
And here's another Bellator question. We know that, right, stars drive pay-per-views immensely, but stars drive viewerships. It seems to be about the main event and who the star is. Mm-hmm. Do you guys think if right, UFC probably is out there trying to hunt the next big huge star, but if Conor McGregor hadn't gone to UFC, if he had started in Bellator, if he had came over and was immediately in Bellator, what type of star do you think he would be? How do you think his career would have progressed so far if he came over and that first fight in the UFC was a fight in Bellator, and he's been there since?
I think it would be maybe same, maybe more. It just depends on how much he would fight and how much he would be on Spike. I think that there is an argument to be said that perhaps he would be more of a star, a mainstream known name sooner than he became. It's just because of the fact that he would have been on cable TV as opposed to pay-per-view. I think that a vehicle in Spike that could promote him, same across the sister networks, that could probably expanded it much faster than he was on with the UFC. Although, I mean, he was on the first FS1 card on the first day of the FS1, but and he was injured, so he was out for a year or so. But I do think that maybe the arc would have come faster than maybe if he was with Spike. But if you compare, you know, how much would he be richer? Probably not, because as John alluded to, I mean, he was on you would be on pay-per-view, you'd be selling out in Vegas all the time. I think that has helped him progress to the star he's become.
Right. So what I'm getting at, John, coming to you, is for the exact same fighter, how much of a star can Bellator build?
Well, I have the exact opposite of what Jason just said.
Okay.
If you're talking,
like
you actually have two different fighters. Actually, if you look at Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor. If Conor McGregor had signed with Bellator, he would never have gotten the acclaim and prestige he got with UFC, because when he rose to the top, it was the big deal was Conor was fighting for the UFC title. That made a big story out of it. The belts in the UFC just have that much more prestige for a whole bunch of reasons. The UFC put all this money into branding. They have a history. They absorbed the Pride belt. They absorbed the Strikeforce belt. It's basically made them the actual, is viewed by most people, the real championship of MMA. So him rising and winning the UFC belt was the catalyst that made him a monster star. And since then, he's just done more and more, more boisterous, keeps winning. He keeps showing everybody up. He would have been a star, I think, in Bellator, but nothing like he was in the UFC. They just can't, they could not produce him like that. Now Ronda Rousey's the opposite when Strikeforce was around. I think if Strikeforce, if their women have never been merged with the UFC, she would still be a very big star. Probably not as big because the UFC does have some branding on it, but she would have been, they could have marketed her still as the toughest, biggest fighter in women's MMA. And CBS could have got behind her. Showtime definitely had big plans for her. She would have been marketed as a major star. They could have been building up to a fight with Cyborg, which they never did, but they, there was big fights you could possibly do with her and get her even still a lot of mainstream. I mean, look at the attention Cyborg Carano got. Right, you could still get tons of attention for someone like Ronda Rousey outside the UFC, and her, unlike Conor, she maybe could have made more money without the UFC because you're better able to negotiate when you're not dealing with the UFC because the UFC has so much leverage that they're famous for your deals. Just not she could have got like a boxing deal where she maybe sold half as many pay-per-views with Showtime, but still collected a lot more money. So that's the two opposites. Now that's where I think Bellator's in trouble. Is they have no way to position their guys as something that's unique or better than UFC fighters right now. And what they need to do, I think, is sign someone that's a top-ranked fighter in the UFC, someone that people know is a top-ranked fighter, and then have someone that they built up just beat the heck out of them. And at that point, then maybe they can start marketing. They have, they can start being the Showtime to UFC's HBO. But that's a long ways off. That's me. That's point there.
So do you think it's just a roster situation, or there's no storyline built around a certain particular fighter?
It's not just the story. I mean, you can do storylines for, but with caps, I think Bellator fighters is kind of the roster is that there's no way for people to gauge them against UFC fighters. UFC fighters have the aura of being in the UFC, of being the champion of the UFC, of all this past history. Without some way to measure a Bellator fighter against them, you're not going to get that prestige. What helped Strikeforce is that if you're a hardcore MMA fan, you remember the Pride era and other promotions. And so you realize you would sit there and go, well, Strikeforce has got top heavyweights because they got Fader who beat up all the guys that were before him. You could follow the lineal heavyweight champion to Fader. And same with their lightweights. Their lightweights were the inheritors of the Japanese MMA lightweight championship. So you could say, okay, these guys are up there with, that's why people rank Gilbert Melendez so high in Shinya Aoki. They were beating the guys that were beating everybody else in the few years before. There's nothing like that anymore. Bellator is basically starting from scratch. They're getting piecemeal that are available from the UFC, but there's no track history or pathway back to the past that they can attach themselves to declare their guys the best. I mean, I think of it always from a boxing point of view because boxing guys become stars, but it's usually when they win the title or go against, and people don't even care what title, but one of the titles, but they see him be one of the title holders that they've heard of. And at that point, this guy is someone really to pay attention to.
Exactly. It makes me think of like the USFL or CFL. If it's the hard part that the problem that competing leagues have is if you're a really good player in the USFL, did people give you a ton of credit? Or if you're Doug Flutie in the CFL, you're a good player, but people didn't really think of he wasn't a star in the NFL, but he came over it and you said, okay, this guy's legit now that he is holding his own in the NFL.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, Steve Young, one of the greatest QBs of all time,
Yeah.
Or Herschel Walker, you're doing great in the USFL. Who, ABA was that way too. The ABA guys could easily play with the NBA guys, but they were, second tier promotion at the time, or second tier basketball league at the time.
Well, some of us don't remember the ABA, John.
Oh, so don't make fun of my age.
But I mean, I don't know. That's the thing that I think of with this pay-per-view strategy is you got Fedor right now, make your money. I'm not sure how it's going to go once he's gone, even if you had a guy like Michael Chandler or even Chael Sonnen, though I think people might be getting a little bit sick of watching Chael Sonnen. I could be wrong. I don't know. You think casual viewers are getting sick of Chael Sonnen? Even in Bellator, I don't know.
I don't think. I mean, I think they're hoping that there's the Fedor hardcores. They're not.
Yeah.
Fedor's not going to sell like he used to. You know, as much as Affliction was kind of a bomb, people forget that there was no real marketing of Affliction. I mean, it was 2 events, and they didn't have a platform to run monthly shows or weekly shows to build up. And if you look at the internal idea of what Showtime had for Fedor, I think he was, you know, he's definitely a much stronger pay-per-view. If you look at what the UFC thought Fedor versus Brock would do, you realize, you know, UFC thought this guy had potential to be a big seller. But Fedor's, you know, he might sell 50,000 his fight, 40,000 on his own, but then he put Chael Sonnen, Vanderlei guys who might remember it, you know, from the UFC, and it's probably there's probably overlap, but it's slightly different audience. You add another 30,000 there, and maybe just hardcore MMA guys like all the other fights, you're over 100,000. So that's and then
which is what Fedor, they did last time.
They might do a little better than last time. I think.
You know, I think they'll do better, just simply because people will remember the rivalry. I mean, first of all, Fedor, and then the rivalry between Sonnen and Silva. Sonnen will, you know, and Silva will both sell. You know, it'll be reminiscent of, you know, Kimbo Dada, those kind of that kind of press conference.
You just like Kimbo Dada.
No, I mean no, not the fight, but I'm talking about the pre-fight.
Oh yeah, I got you.
Where, you know, explosivity at its finest, as Dada would say. I mean, and, you know, but with the point being that you know, people won't want to watch because it will look like it's going to be just an effing brawl, you know, and you know it's probably going to be less than that. But you know, people will want to pay, you know, $60 just to see the two of them. Maybe they'll fight in the parking lot. Who knows? You know, that kind of.
That should be one of their shows. They in the one fight's in the parking lot, and then during the middle of the show, they stop. The cage is empty. They move the camera crew outside. It's in the parking lot. Awesome. That would.
I mean, I would pay $60 to watch.
Yeah, you'd be like, I'm watching that, a parking lot fight. That's just, you know, that's great. The Pitbull brothers versus the Diaz brothers in a parking lot. I'd watch that. I would watch that. And
I mean, yeah, I think you go on YouTube and you can see them how they do in the casinos. I mean, just how they find the casinos.
John's gonna be hired by the Bellator production team next week. Now watch.
I did get. I will say I wrote an old article about how Strikeforce should imitate pro wrestling more. And
I remember that. Yeah.
People at Bellator told me, they were passing that around when Coker showed up or something. They're like,
that's an idea.
Shit, someone send me a check because. What's funny is I'm actually not really I have no interest in Vanderlei versus Chael, and I have no interest in seeing Fedor fight anymore. As a monster Fedor fan, I just don't want to see him fight anymore. But I think there is still interest in those two fights. I'm intrigued by the rest of the card so far. But it's going to be interesting to see it's interesting that Coker's vision seems to be kind of coming out, in the sense that it's turning into more of a, you know, Strikeforce with he's getting better fighters, but he still has a ways to go. If you look at the number of top 10 fighters Strikeforce had compared to Bellator, I mean, Bellator still at, like, if you look at Fight Matrix, of the 7 men's weight classes Bellator has, I think they have 13% of the top 10 ranked fighters, and Strikeforce had like 25% of the top 10. So it's still a ways to go, and it gets even more. The discretion is even bigger when you look at top 5 fighters or top 2 or 3. You know, they had guys that could compete in the top 5. They could start. If you properly booked him, you could start legitimately asking, is this really the number one guy? I think that's the thing Bellator's got to do, is find a way to get people debating that their guys are the real number one guy, and that'll help a lot. If they can do that, then you can possibly put on pay-per-views, because you want to see is really the number one guy, and it makes big fights more enticing for UFC fighters to come, because now you can book them and possibly put them on pay-per-view and offer those guys a ton of money. But,
exactly. That is a verbal description of the network effect from our own John Nash, guys, ladies and gentlemen.
yes, I learned that from Paul. It only took him 3 hours to explain it to me.
People want to see him. Fighters want to go there. Boom, done.
Yeah, we can make it happen. But I don't. I guess next question is, do you see a response with what Bellator is doing? Let's say Bellator is successful at the pay-per-view. Let's say, do you see UFC having any sort of response to that? Do you see them changing their business model again, going a different direction, doubling down? What do you guys think is going to happen with UFC then?
Go ahead, Jason.
I would just think that if business as usual. I mean, I do think though they'll just go with what they've been kind of adopting here, which is trying to see if every couple months they could put together a big pay-per-view card, regardless of what the ratings state. So I mean, that's kind of what I would see. I mean, the thing is with the June 24th pay-per-view, you could definitely see the UFC trying to ramp up advertising for its International Fight Week show. So which will be interesting as well. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I would think a somewhat similar to what John said, that it seems like they're focused on stars now, or trying to find those big, huge stars that are going to make them a ton of money. I mean, just read John's article about Conor's numbers, or anybody else's article about Conor McGregor's numbers, and you'll see that when they get to the point where you start having that debate that this guy over here or this girl over here in Bellator is the best in the world, and it's someone that people really want to see. It's not like, oh, I think Ryan Bader's the best in the world or something like that. Sorry, I'm picking on Ryan Bader, but you know what I mean. He doesn't have the most exciting style. If you start seeing that pop up a lot, then it seemed that that's the point where the UFC might need to take it seriously and, I don't know, buy them. Just kidding. But I mean, if it's just good fighters going over there and you're not having that debate, even if they are getting a few eyeballs, it doesn't seem to be an enormous strategic issue for the UFC. I'm sure it's always something that they're monitoring. What about you, John?
Yeah, I'm wondering if the UFC, if the Bellator pay-per-view is a success. I wonder if we'll see. In the past, pay-per-view used to be like the line that you can't cross to compete with them.
Right.
I mean, Affliction, they counter program, they did all this stuff. They wanted to prevent the whole story of the Strikeforce purchase was, a lot of people say the reason is because they were going to go on pay-per-view. That was the instigator of the purchase. I don't know if that's true. I mean, the UFC claims they bought Strikeforce for the roster, but a lot of people claim it was for the purchase of the pay-per-view, was to prevent them. They knew they were going to go to pay-per-view. So pay-per-view has always been like the Rubicon when you cross. That's the major issue you're confronting. You're basically going head to head with the UFC at that point. And I just wonder if we'll wait and see if it's a successful pay-per-view. I wonder if the UFC starts going back to the more confrontational in the past, or maybe William Morris might just think that's not necessary. We have a new business model, and the business model is, we can make so much money off pay-per-view ourselves with stars that let someone else be successful, and then we'll just outbid you and steal your star. I mean, that used to be what the UFC used to do all the time. Mm-hmm. You could rise in the ranks and be big, but you just couldn't really capitalize it unless you're in the UFC, and so they can hold that out still. I mean,
right.
I mean, realistically, what would be considered a success for Bellator pay-per-view? Like 150? I mean,
I think if they hit 200,000, that's
200.
Yeah, if they hit 200,000, I mean, it's with $200,000 in pay-per-view and $1 million gate, forgetting all the other stuff, you can start paying several fighters multi-million-dollar contracts at a time. And for me, it's always looking at it from the point of view of, for me, pay-per-view and MMA is only about signing top guys and use that to draw ratings and other stuff, because you're only going to start making serious money on pay-per-view if you get 300,000 for 100,000, then you can start making a profit.
Well, so I'll add to that. I think I have a little bit different opinion that maybe this one isn't the one to judge, because again, Fedor's on it and driving a lot of what's going on. Yeah. If they have one where if there's a Michael Chandler headline pay-per-view that does well, that might signal, alert, danger. Or you let Rory McDonald go and Rory McDonald starts doing well or something like that. If it's someone who is young, sort of in their prime, especially home developed in Bellator, that would be the real danger sign for the UFC, in my opinion, as opposed to someone like Fedor who already had his sort of legacy built up and has a bunch of viewers built in and isn't going to be here very long.
I was thinking that too the other day. Is can Bellator take what they have? They have a very good welterweight division right now.
Exactly.
They put together like a welterweight Grand Prix and build up to the final to be a pay-per-view. I mean, are they at that level yet or not? Would people watch the final, whoever gets through a Grand Prix, their 8 best welterweights? Or maybe they go out and sign one more guy. They find someone, they go, I guess maybe they get one more guy from the UFC and one maybe Ben Askren or someone. So you're looking at, wow, that's a solid group of welterweights, all ranked. Could you put that on, build it up over a year, and have the final one be a pay-per-view? If they can do that, that would be huge, because now it's like, wow, crap, they can do stuff to make pay-per-views besides signing old guys that everybody for nostalgia is going to watch.
Well, aren't you kind of talking about describing their old Bellator tournaments?
Well, kind of. I'm thinking more along the line of the heavyweight Grand Prix, but yeah, it's the Bellator tournaments. But the Bellator tournaments were never their top guys. Those were always the guys that were going to compete for the title.
Right.
This you're basically saying, here's this, the winner of this is our top welterweight. And at that point, and the winner of it, if you have enough ranked guys, the winner of it, you could maybe start arguing, well, this guy arguably is the #1 welterweight in the world. Look, he went through, a murderer's row of top 10 welterweights to get where he is.
I think,
again, Bellator, there's another tip from us for promotion.
And I think the name that you probably want to come out of that would be someone like Michael Page.
I was thinking Jake Shields, but okay, Michael Page is, yes, that's a good number 2. What? You guys think I'm not serious? No, I'm just kidding.
He was the one who couldn't wait for Fitch Shields, right?
Yeah, I did.
I was like, Fitch Shields.
It was 4 years too late, 5 years too late. But Shields is almost the prime example of a guy that in the past that built himself up so big that he's the #2, but he didn't have the charisma to be a pay-per-view star outside the UFC. He was so big that the UFC had to get him because they needed to prove that their guy was #1, because this is the only guy arguably you could argue a welterweight was better than GSP at the time. And he could because of who he beat. But if you had Nick Diaz had done what Jake Shields had done, think of the probably could have built pay-per-views around him at Strikeforce.
Right, and he's the guy that the UFC would have, and they'd be like, man, we don't want this 15-month rule that John Nash is proposing unless we've got Shields ranked #2. Yeah. #2. Yeah. If he's ranked #1, we're screwed.
Yeah. Well, that's why. I mean, the beauty of being an MMA promoter is you get to pick all the matchups. So you could put which they already do. I'm sure they sit around and go, who can we have beat this guy so we don't have to offer this guy any good fights. And that's where you book him against Jorge Masvidal, because that's the guy that gets rid of those problems for you.
Hey man, Maya Masvidal, I'm into though. Are you guys? Yeah,
I am, but I do feel bad for Maya because it's like he has pretty much earned his title shot.
Oh yeah, I know. Who was it who put out on Twitter? Was it Sean Al-Shadi? I don't remember. Who put out like the Maya Khabib? Like, it's the fight I never knew I wanted, but now I gotta have it.
Yeah.
How awesome would that be?
Yeah, I agree. Well, I mean, that's one thing. And to get back to the UFC and what they're doing, I think we were talking about the disgruntledness and stuff and frustration of fighters is almost all UFC contracts. The big bump in pay comes when you win the title. You basically get a bump in if you win the belt, you get a bump in straight pay, or your contract comes and you get pay-per-view points only when you win the title. So you can understand why a lot of fighters like Yoel Romero and Jock, those guys are they got to be dying, because that's a huge difference in their pay, getting a title shot or not, and not knowing if they're ever getting a title shot and it's going to be stretched out for years with multiple other opponents. Look at Bisping, how he said he never made over $1 million in a fight. Now he's finally going to get $1 million fight. Great for him, but there's a lot of other fighters that are waiting for that chance too to make money, to be set for, at least make it worthwhile what they've been doing. So, That's should we go on to?
right.
Should we have Jason fill us in on the Mark Hunt situation?
Yes.
Yeah, I can go ahead and do that. And some breaking news, I guess. Mark Hunt, as most of you guys probably know, has sued the UFC, which made it a little awkward when he fought last week or a couple weeks ago. But he sued the UFC, Dana White, and Brock Lesnar for a variety of reasons. One of them being a RICO violation, which under the federal RICO Act, the Civil RICO Act, basically indicating that there is a pattern of conduct by the UFC in which they allow dopers, as the in the pleadings they note, fight clean fighters like Mark Hunt. So they filed a lawsuit in Nevada federal court in January. They served Lesnar. I'm sorry. They served the UFC and Dana White. They haven't been able to find Brock Lesnar since he is now a Canadian citizen. Very interesting for bunch of lawyers, but they couldn't serve him personally because he is a Canadian citizen and he was not accepting service at his palatial estate in Saskatchewan. So they had to, so they had to actually go through a process under what's called the Hague Convention to serve him. And lo and behold, today was the confirmation that a process server in Saskatchewan has been able to contact Mr. Lesnar, or at least Mr. Lesnar's attorney. So the Lesnar's attorneys have confirmed that he has been served. So he'll be appearing in the lawsuit. Now, some context though, the UFC has filed a motion to, and Dana White has filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, and the hearing is May 15th in Nevada. So I had some other thoughts on the lawsuit, as it were, but do you guys have any thoughts on Mark Hunt suing the UFC basically because they allowed a fighter to avoid the USADA drug testing protocol and fight him?
I don't have too much, but I'm not a lawyer, even though a lot of people online think I am. I get that all the time. Aren't you a lawyer? But so I don't have too much.
I just play one on Twitter.
Yeah, on the legal elements of it. It's like you could talk about antitrust without being a lawyer, and then just say stuff about other legal cases. But this feels like to me just like like he's playing poker or something. Like he's doing a gamble. It doesn't seem too expensive for him yet, I don't think, in terms of legal fees. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem too expensive for him yet. And if he can get past motion to dismiss, then maybe you get your chunk of change from the UFC. We don't want this to go on. And from Dana White, we don't want to go through the whole discovery process, have some money, sign this confidentiality agreement. Let's get on with our lives. But I don't know about the chances of it passing motion to dismiss. That would be for you. I don't know. It feels like a relatively inexpensive gamble for someone who makes what, $600,000 or $800,000 for his fights right now, I think.
Yeah. I think, to me, I'm not a lawyer either. I'm not, even though a lot of people too think I'm a lawyer, which makes them extra stupid. But but just talking to people, it seems like a very weak case. But it also reminds me of Vanderlei Silva's case with the UFC when he was sued by them, and it's basically calling the bluff and throwing that Vitor Belfort situation right out in the lawsuit and saying, oh yeah, well, let's just go to discovery. And then the UFC said, well, shit, we don't want to be doing that. So, not that the UFC, there's a lot of things where it doesn't mean that the UFC did anything illegal or wrong, but I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that's just embarrassing that they don't want out there in any sort of discovery phase. So it just seems like he's pulling that bluff where Vitor Belfort also used the Vitor Belfort as his defense against accusing the UFC of being, fixed. As soon as he got past that, they came to a settlement. I think that seems to be the ploy. That's my thinking was the ploy Hunt is doing. Jason will have to tell us if we're right or wrong or how stupid my theory is, but that's my theory.
No, it's a pretty good theory, and so it's funny because the last time civil RICO violations are few and far between, to be honest with you, and I just remember them from law school. But basically, you need 2 violations from one list, And then you also, in addition to that, you need to have them use a wire service, so telephone, fax machine, email, and so like lawsuit they talk about the email from the wrongful email from the paralegal to UFC media about Vitor Belfort's testosterone issues. And then you also need the pattern of conduct over time. So there's the, so in a nutshell, I mean, there's also, I mean, more details to it, but in a nutshell, those are the things. You need two things done over wire and over a period of time. So there's the pattern of conduct, allegedly. I mean, UFC is saying, well, this is kind of BS because, you know, Hunt wasn't even privy to whatever Belfort did. He, you know, the fact that he faced Frank Mir, Bigfoot Silva, Brock Lesnar, just mere coincidence that they all tested positive for PEDs. You know, who are we to say? So he had, you know, there's a breach contract claim. There's my favorite, which I've used actually in my practice, the breach of good faith and fair dealing in contract, which basically says, you know, when you do enter in the contract, you can't be trying to dupe anybody, which is funny. But he also is, the other interesting thing is also claiming personal injuries, which you usually don't do in a contract claim, because, you know, Brock Lesnar beat him. There's also loss of opportunity claim, which is interesting because I didn't know this. Mark Hunt owns a brand called Juggernaut. He actually might have. Do you remember? Have you ever seen him wear it? But he's claiming loss of opportunity because of the fact that since he lost, the Juggernaut brand, you know, value has diminished because when you lose, it's bad for business. So interesting lawsuit. In the end, the other interesting thing is that it's actually a California attorney that's representing him in Nevada District Court, which is interesting. But in the end, you look at all of this thrown together, and it's very hard to see a win at the end, aside from the fact that maybe they survived the motion to dismiss. I think Paul is correct in saying that, you know, a lot of these claims might survive a motion to dismiss because there is some sort of claim there, but when it all comes together, you know, they don't want to go through a whole trial and expend that much money. It sounded really salacious and interesting at the very beginning, but once you get to the nuts and bolts of the lawsuit, they may be looking towards settlement.
Yeah, and I'll add in there really quick. He filed his Hunt filed his opposition or reply to the opposition to the motion to dismiss a day or two ago, and there was a lot of stuff about, hey, this was well pleaded, you know, stuff that I didn't really follow. But one thing he had in there was something about also lost opportunities for title fights, and he said something to the effect, if I recall correctly, that the title fights are worth $800,000 to $1 million when you're the challenger. I know this because I had a signed deal, something like I had a signed deal saying as such. I think if I recall correctly, something like that.
So the one thing, and this will be brought out by UFC, it was very vague as to the contract detail of it, because he was saying that in his contract, which was filed in the lawsuit but under seal, so we can't see it, in his contract, his title fights would have been escalated from $850,000 to $1 million per title fight. The question being is, are you talking about when he becomes champion, or are you talking about when he participates in a title fight? You know, what does that clause actually state? Because according to the UFC 200 pace, or even was it UFC 200? He was paid $750,000, and then this last 207 this past March, a couple weeks ago, he was paid $800,000, something to that level. Yeah. But anyway, I'm not sure what he was actually talking about. And what I'm also interested in is that they haven't brought this up, that he's probably in the top 10% of paid fighters on the UFC roster right now, right? I mean, there's not too many people that make over $500,000, even the champions.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. He makes good money. John, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I'm just saying that definitely. I think I when I pulled fighters, what they make, that definitely puts them in the top. God, I'd probably 5% making 800,000 or more a fight.
That's amazing for not being a title holder.
Yeah, that's that he got such a. I mean, that's almost unheard of for a non-title holder. I guess heavyweights are that valuable.
And never held a title, right? I mean, I don't recall him holding one in the UFC or Strikeforce.
He won a K1 tournament, didn't he? Title.
I don't really.
Yeah, those don't really count. Tournaments. I don't know what's gonna. Wasn't it? But yeah.
Yeah, and should I give a quick update on the UFC lawsuit, or should we call it a day?
Do a quick one, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah. All right. So just for a quick one, we are the close of fact discovery. We're in discovery right now, and the UFC antitrust lawsuit from the 6 fighters against the UFC. The close of fact discovery is scheduled for April 30th. And what we've had happen recently is the UFC and the fighters have subpoenaed documents from Bellator, and Bellator does not want to give them up, specifically focusing on fighter contracts, the negotiations about those contracts, and revenue and expense financials, P&L, stuff like that. Bellator is willing to give up sort of high-level financial documents, how they've done in a year, I think maybe in a quarter, but the fighters and UFC wanted event-level financials, and they wanted to see what every fighter was getting and how the company was doing at an event-by-event level or basis. And so Bellator was fighting those. It started in California. The judge kicked it over to Nevada, and now that it's in Nevada, the fighters want a 60-day delay in all future deadlines. They want fact discovery pushed back 60 days. So that's where we're at. Right now, it should end on April 30th. The next thing would be expert discovery over the next few months. And then and as we get into the fall, it would be about class certification. Remember, if this class doesn't get certified, the case is probably over. And then as we get into early 2018, it becomes about summary judgment, where the UFC could possibly win the case outright. I highly doubt the fighters would win the case outright, or the case could be narrowed down. And then as we get into the summer, we get towards what just happened? Oh, sorry. Early 2018, my dog made a weird noise. Early 2018, summary judgment. As we get into the summer, late summer, that's where a trial happens. But did you want to add your thoughts on what the California court did, Jason?
I don't like the California court did. If you were to read it, would infuriate you if you were a lawyer, just because they essentially punted the case to Nevada, stating that hey, they know they've dealt with the discovery motions, they dealt with all the information, they've dealt with the protective order. Which is, I mean, if you consider this, if you were just a company, and then all of a sudden you get served a subpoena and say you had to turn over all of your documents, all your business documents, and you comply, and then they say, no, that's not enough, we need all of it. And so you're left kind of saying, well, no, screw you, we're going to court. You go to your local court where you're supposed to be, because that's where, I mean, they're venued what? They're in Newport Beach, whatever. They're in Southern California. And that's what they have to do. And now you got the magistrate over in LA just saying, no, you got to go to Vegas. And two of the reasons, which really, if you're a lawyer, you throw up your hands or you pound the table, you do whatever passive aggressive thing you do, is that they said, one, maybe you could appear telephonically. You could argue your motion on the phone. Court call, baby. Or, hey, look at the map. The states are together. So it's okay that we're screwing with your rights as a non-party to this lawsuit for you to travel over there. So I mean, I know this is a big company, but imagine you didn't have this money in the budget for all these attorneys to fight the motions and then travel to a foreign court in town. You're probably going to have to give up those documents. And now, I mean, the thing is, you know, in these types of the cases, you know, the lawyer, it's only the lawyers, only the UFC lawyers are going to do this. So they should not give any of this sensitive information to directly to the UFC. So I don't know how that works out when they argue the motions, and which will happen, and then I don't know how that's going to work out when they depose Scott Coker or whoever. I mean, and whoever else they decide to depose from Bellator. But I mean, realistically, it was a pretty weak opinion from the California court, if you ask me.
There you go, Jason Cruz smacking down Judge Rosella Oliver, I think it was, from Los Angeles.
Yes, and I am a member of the California bar inactive.
No need to sugarcoat it, Jason. Tell us how you really think.
All right, guys. Anything else you want to add?
Only that I hope Joe Silva's testimony gets leaked. That's it.
All right. Okay. I have a different point of view because I used to work on these cases. Really quick, why do you think everybody keeps talking about Joe Silva's testimony getting leaked? It was, I think it was Snowden who also said something to me about Joe Silva over everybody else. Because so what do you think?
Well, I think Joe Silva. I mean, I think people just don't realize how important Silva was basically involved with probably every major kind of fight relation decision of the company. So there's, you know, I mean, there's a lot of disgruntled people with Silva and stuff like that. But I think if you want to know the inner workings of the UFC and, you know, how they did stuff and how they negotiated contracts, I'm sure Joe Silva was the man that did most of them. He was involved with most of it. So he's the guy you want to hear. I think he had probably a bigger part to deal with the dealings with fighter contracts negotiations than Dana White did. And he probably had much bigger even than Lorenzo Fertitta. He was the guy that, you know, he might not have written the contracts himself. They had lawyers, but I'm sure he designed a lot of the clauses. He thought of ways to make it work. He thought of, you know, who to offer a contract when, you know. So a lot of questions about how the UFC operated as a business, how they behaved. I think Joe Silva is going to probably answer more than anyone else.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, it'll be interesting because will Silva have his own attorney, or will the UFC attorneys claim that he is their client, you know, representing them at the deposition? That's a little interesting detail about that. And yeah, no, I definitely would see about trying to see if we could purchase those transcripts. Those would be like very interesting transcripts. And I doubt that the Fertittas and Dana White last just a day in deposition testimony. I could see that thing running on and on. So
I definitely see Joe Silva being important, and probably Dana White isn't as important as a lot of people think that he is. But when it comes to the overarching strategy of things, I would think that Fertitta is the man. And so and then nobody's going to give any credit to the CFO, but they're going to be pummeling that guy with questions, important questions. About whoa.
Oh, sorry. It's my dog. Go ahead.
Well, I think you're right about Lorenzo, but I think who's going to execute those strategies is going to be Joe. I mean, big part of the question of the whole lawsuit is the contracts and how they're used. And I think that's why Joe Silva is going to be because you'll see with Joe Silva's testimony how he related to fighters and managers if those contracts could be abused the way that they claim they can. If those, you know, if they were never used the way that the plaintiffs claim they were, then Joe Silva clears that up too.
Yeah, they're gonna look for a slip up from Joe Silva. I mean, they're gonna look up for a slip up from everybody.
What if Joe Silva goes heel and turns straighter against the UFC? It's like out of left field. Like, oh my God, he's working for Bellator now. This is MMA has really become pro wrestling.
Yeah, well, when we put this clause in, there was talk about monopoly. What? No, I didn't say that. Huh? What?
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. I'm not gonna make jokes about it. Anyways, so I think that's a show. We did one.
Absolutely. 4 months, we got caught up. For those still with us, we will be doing more regular ones, and we won't need to catch up like this. Again, a lot of it was my fault. I actually had to do real work.
Well, I was unavailable too for months.
Yeah.
I remember out of town and then with pneumonia, so there's no way I could have done it.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. We quit the show. We're done.
On behalf of John Nash and Jason Cruz, I'm Paul Gift, reminding you to keep doing business as usual.